castle has so much history, with it passed through so many families, but it fell to ruin with towers falling in the late 18th century, and the stone was used to repair roads and the gatehouse. Archaeological surveys of the site continue to find more information, from forgotten medieval gardens to an Iron Age carved stone head that was discovered and thought to be an indication of Celtic rituals in the site. Could have been something to do with the Druids. Now, way back when, the land here was marshland, and it's believed that the early settlement used that as a defensive tool. And it's also thought that the earthworks around this location was Penguern, which was a settlement of sub-Roman Britain, which was between the end of Roman rule and the Anglo-Saxon settlement, and situated on what is now the English county of Shropshire, adjoining the modern Welsh border, a place where the Dark Age rulers of the Welsh kingdom of Powys resided. And from a series of tragedy poems written around the 7th century, describing the life of a king, Cinderlin, it indicates that the remains of his hall could be sighted underneath the castle. He was a prominent ruler who, with allies, defeated the Northumberland King Oswald, apparently whose head and hands were cut off and hung from a tree. Oswald's tree, given the name for Oswald's tree. I didn't know that. The castle was once moated, but what remains now is a massive pond around the front of it. It's a popular spot to stop off with the young kids and feed the ducks and have a picnic. However, in its silty depths may lie the key to the cursed Elizabethan trunk that was stored in one of the castle rooms. And chilling stories of the trunk bringing bad luck or death to those who opened it are linked to the ghostly sightings of 2 young children in one of the windows of the gatehouse tower. Now, the legend says that they died a gruesome death after it was opened, and this is why it is now permanently shut and removed from the castle, with the key said to have been thrown into the moat. And the castle is on Shropshire's Arthurian trail map, who was based on Owain Thankwyn, a 5th century warrior king. Some people think the real King Arthur. And due to a manuscript in the British Library, it shows how several places in Shropshire have King Arthur stories, as I've stated before. And the castle ended up in the hands of descendants of Owain in the 13th century, Fulk Fitz Warin, who was described in the medieval manuscript as a living heir of Arthur. And legend says that Fulk was a guardian of the Holy Grail, which was kept hidden in the chapel of the castle. And then we have the interesting story of a Shropshire knight who may have inspired the legend of Robin Hood. Now, the man in question was Faulk FitzWarin III, and he was a rebellious Shropshire lord with a penchant for upsetting kings and sheriffs. Now, the legend actually starts with his father, Fulk II. And he'd laid an ancestral claim on the castle in 1195, but it wasn't a clear-cut claim. Now, sometime in the late 12th century, the castle was owned by a Welsh lord, Roger of Powys, and Fulk had tried to take possession of the castle, but it was never granted to him. They say the legal work was apparently done and dusted. There was just one thing to do, and pay a fine of 40 marks. But things went wrong when he died in 1197, before he had the chance to take possession of the castle, which forced his son to dip into his trust fund. And apparently the young lord, Fulk II, apparently did so willingly, as you would if you stood to gain such a valuable real estate. And in 1200 he paid a feudal relief fee of £100 to gain possession of the manor. Now it's said that young Fulk paid the money but never got the property. Because during the Middle Ages, kings had the final say on pretty much everything, provided that they had the military clout to back it up. And it's said that Fulk Jr. was not on friendly terms with the recently crowned King John. Now the story is that Fulk Jr. had grown up at the court with John, and they had a quarrel over a chess game. And Fulk had won, and they ended up having a bit of a fight, and the prince got cross and ran to his father, and his father humiliated him for being such a poor loser as Samadhi, and he never forgave FitzWarin for that. And John had unexpectedly ascended the throne in 1199, and he refused to grant young Fulk, Whittington Castle, instead handing the land to a son of a Welsh nobleman, Roger de Powys. Now, young Fulk wasn't amused at all. He was enraged, and he ended up killing Whittington's new owner during a fracas when out hunting. And as a result of this, he was exiled and forced to live the life of an outlaw, apparently hiding out with 52 followers near Nescliffe Fort, while being pursued by 100 knights sent by the king. Now this is where the Robin Hood parallel starts to emerge. Now, a lot of what is known about FitzWarin's story comes from a medieval French novel called The Guest of Fulk Fitz Warin. And some of what's written is very similar to the Robin Hood tale, leading people to believe that Robin Hood is in fact a fictionalised account of Fulk Jr.'s time as an outlaw. Now, the actual folklore associated with this phase of Fulk's life tells that he spent 3 years from 1200 to 1203 robbing from the rich and giving to the poor. And we have him holed up at Nescliffe for 3 years. Now, whether he was robbing merchants and giving to the poor, we don't really know. But what we do seem to know is that he was active around the time of the Crusades, which ties in because the original early Robin Hood stories were around that time of the Crusades as well. Of course, the novel is thought to be part truth and part fantasy, so it's very difficult to really tell what happened during them 3 years. But what is known that his exile did come to an end. One reason could have been due to money exchanging hands in 1203, when King John pardoned Fulk and granted him Whittington Castle. Another story, which there isn't much evidence for, is that Fulk kidnapped the king with his band of merry men and then forced him to pardon him. Now this would have been very Robin Hood-like, don't you think? Now after he got his hands on Whittington Castle, things went pretty much steady for 10-15 years. But it seemed Fulk had never forgiven King John for what he had done in the past. And when an opportunity arose to get revenge, he took full advantage. Now, for one reason or another, or many reasons, King John had become extremely unpopular with the elite of England, because the barons thought John was throwing his royal weight around too much, so they rebelled and brought about a decisive defeat for the king at the hands of the French in 1214. And this, among other things, led to the signing of the Magna Carta. Now, Fulk wasn't a baron as such, but he threw his lot in with the rebels, and this would have made him a target for the Sheriff of Shropshire, who was responsible for keeping order in the county. Perhaps another Robin Hood parallel. Now, as we know, King John didn't really play fair following the Magna Carta, and conflict broke out across the country. Had the king not died the following year in 1216, there's a fair chance Fulk would have found himself on the run for the second time in his life, and that's probably the end of the Robin Hood similarities. But Fulk did lose possession of this land again during a siege to the castle. It was held by the Welsh king Llewellyn the Great in 1223. But the ever-determined Fulk did end up getting it back, with a diplomatic marriage linking him to Llewellyn. Now, whether Faulk FitzWarin was indeed the real Robin Hood or not is up for debate, but he was actually a real man. And even though the details we have about his life are like fantasy, there's no doubt this particular Whittington Castle legend is extremely fascinating.